It says Caroline's left, so that could be interesting.
Yeah, could be.
Hello, everybody. It wouldn't be an Evolving HR webinar if we didn't have some technical problems at the start. So Carolyn was here literally 30 seconds ago. She's now disappeared, but I'm pretty sure that she'll be back shortly. So I will let Anthony and Elaine introduce themselves, and we'll hope that Caroline is back by the time they've done that. So Anthony, do you want to go first? Tell people who you are.
Oh, I feel honoured. Get to kick it off. Hey, everyone. My name's Anthony Nash. I'm the Chief Executive at Leadership Success. So we've been around for about 13 years now. We do focus on, it's really coaching and supporting teams and leaders, but something that I've been very deep in for the last 2 years is the AI space and what the implications are for business. And as a part of that, I run a podcast called Enterprise Alchemy, and I've spoken to hundreds of C-suite leaders from around the world. So I feel like now I've got a really good perspective on what the challenges are with AI. So I'm very much looking forward to getting into the conversation, answering questions, and just going through. So thank you very much as well, Kirsty, for having me.
It's good to see you. And Elaine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Elaine Corona. I'm the owner of Solasta Coaching, which is an HR consultancy, and I'm also an executive coach and mentor for HR professionals. I developed an interest in AI probably over the last year. I live in the Isle of Man, and there's been a lot of promotion by the government here, helping people to understand all about AI. And it's something I've always been interested in, technology. So I'm mainly HR, but with a technology bent.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Kirsty, for inviting us.
Oh gosh, you're very welcome. And when Carolyn is able to get back in again, we will let her introduce herself. Oh my goodness. So I'm going to start, but I will come back to Carolyn for her answers as well. But for any HR professional who is completely new to AI, where would you recommend that they start? And Anthony, I'll come to you first on that one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the like, if you were to talk about the real fundamental starting points, is understanding what actually AI is and what it does. Because I think the word, and I was talking about this with somebody yesterday, is a little bit of a misnomer. So as in, it's not a sentient being, right? The robots aren't going to rise up and take over the world. It's really just a more advanced way of programming that's gathering information, right? Now, where people, I think, get a little bit freaked out is with the large language models, and I'm sure everybody has heard of ChatGPT and probably uses it, right? Quite regularly. I use it every day. And the thing that freaks people out a little bit is that it can talk back to you in natural language. But essentially, so then it's like, oh my gosh, this thing has a brain. But it's just a program that's just able to take data that was previously kind of disparate and all over the place and feed it back to you in a much more human way, because it understands language, so it can talk back to you. So I think the first thing is to understand AI as a general concept is useful, and what it's doing is either, it's searching a database and it's putting up things that are relevant to you, and probably you think about like previously, we'd use Google, and Google, you do a Google search and it gives you the web pages. Well, now it's saying, well, actually, I know the content that's inside that. So I can basically now take snippets of that and feed it back to you in a way that's contextually relevant. So I think that's probably the first thing. And then the second thing that I would, really think about is, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, right? We never kind of get this. Often with the new technologies, we can run away with things and it's like, okay, what's the shiny new object? And oh, this is so cool. But at the end of the day, it's saying, well, how do we deploy this to solve a particular problem that we have? So for me, those are the two starting points: is understand what it is and kind of what it's doing at a general level, and then saying, how do we apply that to the specific problems or challenges that we have within our business or our operating environment?
Yeah, that makes an awful lot of sense. Carolyn, welcome.
Hi, I realized that I was just staring at a blank screen for far too long, so I thought I'd better come back in again.
Yeah, I think it might have kicked you out.
I think it kicked you out. Yeah, it was very strange. Do you want to just introduce yourself? I asked Anthony and Elaine to introduce themselves already, but...
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Kirsty. Yeah, Carolyn Shepherd. I'm an AI process consultant, which basically means that I help people to, especially in L&D and HR, to feel comfortable with AI, and to really, by looking at 4 different pillars, which we look at, we help you to become comfortable with AI and help start the conversation across the organization. That's really what we do.
Brilliant. And I'm going to ask all 3 of you, if you want to pop your contact details, LinkedIn links, whatever it is, into the chat, that would be really great. Then people know that they can get in touch with you if they want to.
Sure.
So now I'll distract everybody with that for a minute. So we only got to the first question, Carolyn, and I asked Anthony first, where should people start if they're completely new to AI? So Elaine, I'd love your thoughts on that, and then I'll come to you, Carolyn.
Yeah, well, I mean, following on from what Anthony said, I think they're definitely the groundwork that you need to do before you get started. But I don't think anyone is new completely to AI because it's been around forever. I think the generative AI, which we're all using nowadays, is the new thing. So for people that are new to generative AI, I would say play around with it, experiment, have a look at the different packages that are available. There's lots free. Don't pay for anything until you've really worked out what you want. Learn how to do prompts, prompts are the things that you put in so that you inform ChatGPT, for example, what you're looking for. And the better the prompt that you put in, the better the information that you get out. So that's my advice. Play with it, play with whatever you've got, and just see what you enjoy.
And Carolyn, I know a lot of people kind of, when people talk about AI, and for those that aren't using it every day and that aren't that familiar with it, ChatGPT seems to be the name that keeps coming up again and again. Does that tend to be most people's starting point, do you think? And if not, where else do you think they should start?
Yes, I think it is, Kirsty. I think it is because we're all familiar with the name ChatGPT, and even though it's been around since November 2022, many of us didn't meet it until later. I wrote a book on it in 2023, which, it tells the stories, which is more about, how do people in the real world engage with ChatGPT? And then it gives you some prompts that they've used to help you. But really, the message throughout that book is, as Elaine was saying, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what Anthony said because I was somewhere else at the time. But as Elaine was saying, experiment with it. What I would add to that is, I would say, don't be afraid of it. It's not, it's not a real person. It's not going to judge you. And it is designed in its DNA to be helpful. So probably start with something that doesn't matter to you. Don't use it for work to begin with. I used it to begin with to come up with a recipe for keto bread. Don't ask.
Oh, wow.
But it was brilliant.
I didn't even think of that.
And it was absolutely brilliant. I just told it the things I liked and said I needed to be keto friendly because I was sick of eating horrible keto bread that didn't rise. So it came up with a really good recipe. And that really, enthused me. I thought, oh, wow, if it'll do that, it can do anything.
I love that. That's absolutely. I hadn't even thought of using it outside of work. Like the things that I've used it. I mean, I've messed around with it, like creating silly little pictures and things.
Yeah.
Of friends, like, make my friend look like this sort of cartoon. Like I've done that, but that's actually quite a productive, non-work related use for it. I like that. I'm interested for those of you who are listening in. Can you just pop in the chat for us some of the tools that you have used from an AI perspective? And are many of you using ChatGPT, for example, regularly or occasionally? I'd just really like to hear sort of where the audience is at in terms of their experience. And I'll have a nose through the answers in a second. So, Carolyn, I'll stay with you for the next question. How are you seeing HR teams integrating AI into their workflows at the moment, and what sort of obstacles and roadblocks are people coming up against?
Yeah, well, the first thing that I think, it's changing all the time is the first answer to that. So my experience would have been quite different maybe a year ago to what it is now, and there's been a gradual sort of acceptance. But we all know that HR tends to be quite cautious, especially when it comes to technology, and does tend to sit on the sidelines a little bit more than other functions maybe. I mean, for example, marketing and call centers are well into AI now. They're really all into it because there's a massive commercial reward for doing so. Or imperative. For HR, I think we're more cautious, but policies and procedures, to me, I was a bit shocked that HR wasn't quicker to realize they needed some AI policy, an AI policy in place. I wrote one, it took me ages to research everything, and then nobody wanted it. And I was like, surely you must want this. It's an AI policy, right? We're all in HR, we're about compliance first. But I think that is a good example of how we were sort of almost not just waiting to see, but almost a little bit skeptical. And this morning I heard on a podcast that I listened to, the guy said, I can't even tell you how many billions Anthropic has just raised this week. I'm just going to call it gazillions, he said, gazillions. And that just says it all, really. I think that it's getting so crazy everywhere that even HR is realizing, yep, we need to be part of it. And the first thing they're going to is chatbots, because they're seeing it as an opportunity to answer a lot of questions, I think, that you might get from employees. I'm sure you're aware of that.
Oh, I like that. Elaine, how about you? What have you seen with the HR folk that you talk to?
A lot of the roadblocks that they have, I would say, are getting buy-in from the C-suite. And being able to convince the IT functions that it's okay to use them. So I think over the past few months, they've definitely been using AI an awful lot more. Things like Microsoft Copilot, they're a bit more controlled within the organisation. What I would say to anybody in an organisation who has got robust policies and they're not able to use it for certain things, get an account privately and just play around with it yourself. I think the other roadblock is around data privacy and ethical considerations. So data privacy, particularly if you're putting information into a generative AI, which is not part of your organisation structure or an unpaid for, because a lot of the models can use your data to enhance or educate others, and to, there's no real stipulations about what it can and can't do in some of the free services. But also things like ethical considerations. Some people are not don't want their information to be put into it at all, and therefore you have to have an opt-out. Make sure that you let people know what you're using it for and how they can opt out of it. Are they using it? I would say using it a lot in recruitment, things like CV screening. I mean, applicant tracking systems have been around for years. You can use it from everything from creating your advert right through to shortlisting your candidates, providing your interview questions. It can do whatever you want, basically.
And that's something I'm going to come back to actually in a minute. But Anthony, how about you? Have you seen how have you seen it kind of effectively integrated into HR workflows?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. To start, I think there's a couple of the roadblocks that I'd like to echo, I suppose, that Caroline and Elaine were talking about. So definitely data privacy and just general data management is a big thing, right? And saying, well, we want to make sure that either the personal data that we're inputting or the company data, for example, if you're saying, help me rewrite a presentation or rewrite this document, that the information that's contained within it is not being used to train the actual generalized models. So that for me, there is a lot of concern around that. And there certainly are ways, like if you have, let's say with GPT, like if someone has developer access to it, you can set it up so that it's not being used to train the models. But if people, like Elaine, I think you said, if it's just general free tools, you got to be careful about that stuff and really understanding where is this information going and how is it being stored and how is it being used. That being said, I think just to go back to maybe something, Caroline, you were mentioning, AI has been around for a long time. Like if we think about, like you go way back to like remember that little annoying paperclip thing in Word or whatever?
God.
Remember that thing?
Yes, you could change it to a cat or a dog as well.
That's it. Oh, hey, I'm here to help you. Well, that's kind of like an early version, right, of doing the kind of thinking for you. So I think it's been in our workflows actually for longer than we realize. Certainly, some of the things I suppose I've seen, just general assistance. So like Copilot, for example, companies rolling that out. And I think the other stuff, so where we're really seeing the usage of it, and this is in things that I suppose we're developing and what I've seen in and around, let's say, the learning and development space, is helping to provide more contextualization and more personalization to people in terms of learning and applying skills and behaviors, right? Because the thing is, like a general, like let's say something, if you have just like an e-learning platform or software, yeah, sure, it can fire up, here's this module and here's what you need to know, but you can't interact with that in a way where it can talk back to you. Whereas even something as simple as the chatbot now offers a much more rich experience, particularly if it understands some more information about you and what you're trying to achieve. So I'm definitely seeing there's interest there, but I suppose the very macro level takeaway from all the folks that I've interviewed and spoke to on the podcast, and this is various, so it's not just chief people officers, CEOs, CFOs, I'd say like chief marketing officers, AI is hot. And in terms of my view, I think what we're going to see with this is a revolution akin to what you saw with the birth of the internet. But it's just that right now it's in its infancy, right? And large language models and how do we use those in companies, et cetera. I'd say we're in almost like the Wild West days of the internet. You know what I mean? So,
oh my God, I remember those.
Yeah, when, do you remember when you used like Alta Vista search and all these types of things? And the other thing you had to do when you type into the search bars, and you just say plus this, minus that, put that in quotes, do this. Like we're sort of at that stage, right? Because I'm sure we'll get onto this, but prompt engineering and knowing how to ask the right questions to get the information that you want back. So there are pros and cons with a general model. And the pro is obviously you can ask it anything. The con is that you have to know what to ask it if you really want to get a refined answer.
This reminds me, so I'm very old. And when I started working, 1995, I started working. And the company my very first job, we did not have the internet. We had an internal email system that was like CC Mail, it was called. But you couldn't send emails externally. And then when we got that, of course, lots of companies were getting it at the same time. And rather like with you saying about your AI policy that you wrote, Carolyn, no one wanted it. Nobody back then had an internet policy. And we suddenly found ourselves, I was working for a very large European bank. Everyone was looking at porn. And we suddenly found ourselves as an HR department going, oh my God, like we didn't see this coming. And everybody's like, why didn't you see it coming? It was obviously the first thing people were going to go and look at. But the number of disciplinary hearings and things that we had to have, and it was like breaking new ground. And to anybody here who's probably younger than about 30 or even 40, you've never worked in a world where that wasn't regulated or there wasn't guidance from employers. But it was just like a free-for-all for like the first 6 months to a year, and then it got nailed down very quickly. And that was the end of that. But it was hilarious, absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, that's kind of like the policies lagging the tech, right?
Absolutely. Let me come back to recruitment. Elaine, you mentioned recruitment a minute ago. So one of the things that I keep hearing when people are talking about AI is around how it's going to enable the reduction of hiring bias. And I wondered what your thoughts were on that. Do you see that as happening in a positive way, or is there a risk that it could just reinforce biases that are already there, given that we're the ones that are putting the prompts in? I just appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I would say the old saying, crap in, crap out, but bias in and you'll get bias out. I think that HR leaders really need to be careful that they're auditing what is going in there in terms of processes and decision making, because there are many things that bias can creep in. You've got the hallucinations that ChatGPT can make as well. Anthony's probably better placed to talk about them than I am, but it's a very real thing, and I think nothing takes away from the experience, the actual physical HR experience that people have. You can't rely on the technology to give you all the answers, because if you do, then you will probably come a cropper on it. So I think you have to be aware of who's programming the AI that you're using. And we already see the big suite of the white male, pale and stale, the Elon Musks, all these, maybe I'm saying too much here, all these sort of ways that AI is created at the moment. I think we just have to be very careful.
Carolyn, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I know there was the whole thing where people were complaining, I think it was last year, because it was coming up with, like, they were asking about doctors and nurses, and it was coming up with he every time for doctors and she every time for nurses. And, that's the kind of bias that is there. So I'd appreciate your thoughts on that from a recruitment perspective.
Yes. Yeah, well, my thoughts on it, I've been asking women for, well, it seems like 2 years now. It feels like that, for 2 years to get involved with using AI, because we must influence it. All different groups, whether you're talking about ADHD groups or you're talking about culturally different groups, everybody must get involved and use it, because it will eventually reflect those opinions, those more diverse opinions. One of the statistics, I mean, I'm going back 3 months, it could be worse now, but was that 50% of the material on the internet now, content on the internet, is produced by AI. That's 50%, just for anyone who missed that statistic. 50% of what you find on Google and everywhere else is now written by AI. And obviously it's growing, and it won't be long before it's almost 100%, I guess. But as long as we're co-creating with AI, I don't really see the problem. As long as you're getting the human in the loop, as long as you're getting the human, involved in that, that's okay. So keep producing your blogs, keep producing your articles. Allow LinkedIn to absorb what you're writing about. And I saw a post a little while ago saying, turn off that security, to make sure you've got the button turned off on your security settings, to make sure that LinkedIn can't use your blogs and your posts and things for training. And I thought, well, why not? I want it to. That's what I'm putting it on there for. I want people to know how I think, what my views are. And I feel that, there are actually platforms that you could go to where you contribute towards training data for the LLMs. That's for people who are probably a little bit more serious about it than we are here today, and probably have a bit more time as well than we have today. But yeah, I think get involved, because we are influencing it, and correct it as well, because if you see it saying to you, if it gives you, I did a super little photograph image on Midjourney a while ago, and I asked it to put, all I said was, it was gender neutral, and I just asked for a boardroom full of directors and a secretary bringing in the coffee. Guess what I got? I got all male directors, yes, all male directors, and a woman bringing in the coffee. Now, I was fuming with that, so I corrected it and said, no, all the directors will be women, and the person bringing in the coffee will be a man. Well, I was being just totally ridiculous myself, because that's just not happening in the real world. So where do we find this balance? That we need to reflect the world as we are evolving, rather than just creating yet another kind of Disney view of how it really is.
There was a company that posted an image yesterday, and it was it was a performance review technology company. And they had clearly had this image generated by AI, and it was HR talking to a manager, and the manager was a smartly dressed older white man, and the HR lady had quite a low-cut top on. And that I'm not surprised by, but the fact that they used it, because I'd have looked at it and gone, oh, God, I'm not using that. That's just like, oh, but they'd actually used it. Somebody, one of our evolving HR providers who, she doesn't shy away from an argument or a difficult conversation, left the most phenomenal comment on their post about sexism and stereotypes.
I can guess who that is.
Yes, I'm sure you can, and I'm happy to share it with you later, because I saw it on Facebook this morning, and she literally posted it on Facebook and went, "Did I go too far with this?" And I went, "No, you didn't. You didn't. They shouldn't have used it." But well, yes, those things do happen.
I mean, there's still, if you have a man and a woman in a picture at all, created by Midjourney or any of the other text to image LLM or platforms, then invariably the woman is teetering around in some sort of high heels. Well, I hardly ever see women in high heels these days. Most of us are walking around in trainers or whatever just to get the job done. So it's lagging as well. It's got kind of like, I guess that, it's consumed the entire body of work available to the world. And, how much of that was actually produced in the past 5 years? I don't know. Probably not so much.
Very good point. Yeah, very good point. How do you think, I did have a conversation with someone last week who actually said, I think there's a lot of change coming in the world of HR. I think HR functions are going to be entirely redundant in 12 to 18 months. And I remember I was sitting there thinking, that's a little bit cynical, because I think our work may change. And I hope that it does in some ways. But just interested on, I guess, firstly, what are your thoughts around how the impact that this is going to have on HR work going forward? But then what do we need to do as HR professionals to make sure that we stay on top of technology advancements, that we stay relevant and, needed, I suppose?
Do you want me
Go
to
on, Anthony. Sorry, I have to choose a person, don't I?
Yeah, no, it's all good. Okay.
Go for
it. HR being redundant in 18 months. No, sorry, I don't see that happening. So you've got to kind of look at it and say that. So there's one thing I would pick up on from the previous conversation, or the previous question point, which is that you need a human. AI is not going to do it for you, right? Or if it is, it can produce all sorts of aberrations. You need a human in the loop. So that's the first point, is I don't think you're going to get away from that. But if you just say, how is it going to change the nature of HR? And things never happen. 18 months is way too short a time frame, first of all. So I think if you're talking like 5 to 10 years, how are things going to shift? I think what you're going to see is that in general, rather than HR functions or people functions running things directly and going deep, as in saying, well, when there's a conflict with managers, HR has to get involved, right? Or in terms of training and development, like we have to try and centrally figure out all the problems that are going on in the organization and solve it. I think that's going to change dramatically. So I think actually what's going to happen is the role is going to shift, right? And the value that people teams play in an organization. And I feel it's more going to shift towards being an enabler of change, right? And setting or if you like, setting the field of play, rather than necessarily having to like police things and get involved. Because the thing is, it just takes too many people. It's too difficult. And those are the types of, if you like, more routine activities. I think what you're going to see more is, and this is what AI can enable, because it can hyper personalize things if it knows stuff about you and the organization and the teams in various ways. I think you're going to see more of a move towards helping people to help themselves. But still somebody has to be there setting out the ground rules, right? And providing the parameters and saying, well, you know, here's line A, here's line B. Now you guys can figure out what you need to do, and we can deploy tools to help you do that. But that doesn't mean that the importance of the role is going to go away. In fact, what I suspect is that as just AI tools and other productivity enhancements get deployed more fully in organizations, it's going to free up time for routine tasks. And what you're going to see is that for managers themselves, right, there's going to be, okay, well, we've got the task stuff under control. So now it's about managing people and managing the relationships of people inside the organization, so that there's going to be an even bigger focus, right, on actually getting people to work together more effectively. So yeah, look, and everyone have their own opinion in terms of AI and its disruption and the changes to HR. But from where I sit, as I said, I think there's no chance that they're going to get rid of HR, the need for HR, and certainly not in an 18-month time frame.
Elaine, what are your thoughts around how people in HR should sort of develop and make sure that they stay on top of all of this?
Well, I think firstly that HR people have been bleating forever about the admin getting dragged down and not being able to get to the strategy because we've got so much admin. So this kind of swoops in and helps resolve some of that issue. I think working on communication skills, problem solving, critical thinking, becoming a bit more aware of their business acumen, being curious about what's going on in the business and being able to integrate the AI into their daily routines will free up the time to train managers and work with them to help them to manage their people better.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And Carolyn, what would you add to that?
Well, I really think, Kirsty, that this is an opportunity for HR in collaboration with L&D to lead workforce AI transformation. And, you know, this isn't a technical issue, it's a people issue. So far from being redundant, I think that they will have the opportunity to reframe HR and its purpose. How that will play out, I'm not sure exactly, but I do know that, you know, we really need to get on top of this, because if we are seen to be too reserved, then how can we expect our organizations to meet the challenges of AI? If we're going to be too reserved, we need to decide where are we in this? Is this our chance to have that seat at the table that we've always wanted? As Elaine said, we were talking about it. Do we want to take that seat at the table, or do we want to be more, you know, pull up a beanbag, as the detractors would say? And, you know, if that's who we are as people, I mean, I personally feel very comfortable in that environment where I'm speaking to people in one-to-one relationships, much more so than sitting at board level, being strategic about everything. I really enjoy those relationships and building those relationships. But somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to be strategic about the organization of the future. The design of our organizations is going to look very, very different. And we can't walk around promising people that they're going to be okay. You know, we have to have an understanding of what is going to happen to job design, and we've got to be able to encourage people to participate in that process of redesigning their own jobs, because I don't think it's going to be mass redundancy or anything like that, but I think things are going to look very different, and we don't all meet. We're not all meeting AI on the same emotional level. Some people are very reluctant. Other people are quite advanced. We only have to look in the chat here to see the kind of responses we're getting. I mean, I'm delighted that Copilot is being used so much, because I have all courses
that's being used a lot.
Yeah, but yet it's awful by comparison to ChatGPT and Anthropic and some of the others. I don't know what Anthony and Elaine think, but I mean, I use it all the time because I have to use it. because it's part of 365, etc. But if you are using Copilot, I'd urge people to start looking at Power Automate, because you can really start getting, if you've got 365 and you're using Teams and all that, Power Automate's amazing. It's the AI-driven workflows that will respond to you in natural language. So fantastic. Get into that. There's plenty of videos on the internet about it. And I'm sure lots of people who train on it. So, if you can get some of that admin work shifted over to Power Automate, you're leading the charge by saying, look, we're doing it. Come on, join in.
I don't know Power Automate. That sounds, but then I wouldn't need to with what I do now. So, but that.
Well, no, possibly not. But it is an app that's included in MS365, and L&D and HR can absolutely save lots of time using Power Automate and be much more organized, I think, is a better way of putting it, perhaps.
Who is, do any of you offer training on how to use some of these tools? Or are you self-taught, or have you gone on courses yourself? Because I know there's going to be people on this that are thinking, okay, I really want to learn more about how to do this, but I can't learn from YouTube.
Go on, Elaine.
Do that.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm pretty much self-taught, but I live in the Isle of Man, and they've got the government have got a digital agency who have been running various workshops for the local community to try and get ahead. So they've linked up with Singapore, and they've got some fantastic resources out there. I'll pop it in the chat for people to go on and have a look, because it takes you through online modules of all the ways that you can use the different AI things that are available. One thing I would say, though, is that it's such a fast-changing world, a fast-changing area, that you really need to keep up to date with which is the best one to use. So today might be Microsoft Copilot, tomorrow might be ChatGPT generation, whatever number they're at now. Because they've just released, I think, voice to video or something like that a couple of days ago. So fast moving, I think, just keep up with what's out there.
Yeah, Elaine, that's interesting you saying that. But I was hearing this morning on a podcast that we're moving now from trying to keep up with all these different things to actually starting to form those relationships of trust with the brand. Like DeepSeek came out with R1 and everyone was like, oh, we need to download this thing. I didn't download it. I was probably one of the few people who didn't, because I'm thinking, well, I don't trust this thing. I don't really know if I should be using it. And I carried on paying my $20 a month for ChatGPT because of the brand. But I was one of those people who, when Google came out, and going back to Anthony's point about, the internet revolution, I was one of these people who formed a relationship with Google. And I hated Yahoo, and I hated that Ask Jeeves thing. And I didn't like Bing or when that came out. But I remember all these brands. And I think it was amazing that Microsoft has managed in this last year to get me to leave Google after all these years, to leave Google Drive and all the suite of Google apps and come over to MS365. And I've had to do it because that's what my customers are using. And I really genuinely think it's going to take over from the other from its competitors in that way. I mean, that's its game plan, obviously. But it's got its opportunity now, which it hasn't had for a long time.
That's really interesting. If you had to pick just one tool to implement in an HR role tomorrow, what would you recommend people use or people look at? I'll ask Carolyn first.
Just one tool? You could only use one tool? Well, it would have to be, for me, I'd have to use Copilot. But I'd be very sorry to have to not be able to use ChatGPT, because it gets me out of all sorts of problems and I can speak with it and it's much more flexible. But I do understand that Copilot it's a different make. Its focus is different. It's got security built in. It's looking at all your documentation and it's very different. But as an independent practitioner, I would definitely choose ChatGPT.
I mean, one of the things so Carolyn ran a workshop for some of the evolving HR providers a couple of weeks ago, and I learned so much in that 1 hour. And one of the things that I hadn't realized until we got on that call was that you can actually prompt ChatGPT to get used to your voice and how you talk, and so that the answers that you get are in your voice. And I practiced it. I'll use it sometimes for LinkedIn posts, and then I quite often tweak them, or very often tweak them, because they don't sound like me. And there are a few things that ChatGPT uses, like the rocket emoji and things like that, and it's like so obvious that it's come from ChatGPT. So I redid it, and I sort of said that, like, how I talk, that I'm quite straight talking and, not very formal and all of that. And the next time I tried it, I didn't change a single word. And it just blew me away, because I read it and I was like, oh, that sounds like me. It was really weird. And that's just, I only use it for very basic things like that. But it's just an absolute game changer. Like, if you've got to write something about something, like, all of the times, I'll be completely honest, every single one of these webinars, I use ChatGPT to generate the questions, and then I tweak them, because I'm not an expert in all of the subjects that we have these webinars are about. So I always use it as my kind of backbone, and then I, take out the repetition and make it sound more real.
It's way easier than starting from a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah. Like, what on earth would I have, like, if I had sat there trying, what questions do I want? I wouldn't have been able to do it. And I didn't want to bother you guys. So I'm like, well, let's see what ChatGPT has to say. And then I'll send it to you and you can tweak it. And you can make the amendments, and you did. And that's where we get to what we're going to talk about. But, I can't possibly be an expert on all this stuff. So Anthony, in terms of tools and things, what are the ones that you would recommend?
Oh, okay. So there's taking out any bias, because just full disclosure, like, we developed a tool that sits on top, an application that sits on top of GPT to help people work more effectively together. So we take in contextual information about who you are, who your team is, what your goals are, right? So there's an application layer on top of this. So I have a little bit of bias and preference, but to me personally, in my everyday, it's got to be ChatGPT. And the reason for that is the more you use it, the more you also learn about its limits, right? What it can do and what it can't do. So as I was feeding it increasingly complex information and data and asking it to do stuff with it, you find where the limits are. So it'll take the first bit really well. It misses a lot of the stuff in the middle, and then looks at the last bit, and then gives you, gives you responses. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'm seeing the holes. And for me, like, this is one of the, and I know we talked about, like, well, we'll talk about the skills required, but it's like understanding the prompt engineering to get what you want out the other end, like what you need to ask it, what you need to feed it, to get what you want. Because once you've got those loops kind of down pat and you start to understand what it's doing, and that is just a matter of just play with it, practice it, type stuff in. It doesn't have to be work related, like we said earlier. It could be anything. And just get to learn that a little bit. I think then it just makes life so much quicker, because you know what to ask it to punch out. Like you said, I'm doing a webinar on AI, right, in HR. What are the things I need to know? And so for me, the biggest time saver is I'm not starting from a blank sheet of paper. So it's far easier to edit something down. And look, there's varying degrees of accuracy. Sometimes it's almost spot on. Sometimes it's like 8 out of 10, but I'm like, an 8 out of 10 is a great start. Then I only have to take a tiny little bit of time to edit it rather than to create it from scratch. So that would get my vote.
Elaine?
A hat trick for ChatGPT. I think as an independent consultancy, it's easy because I can make my own rules up what I use. I definitely think that it's great for a blank canvas. It gives you various prompts. Where I would be very cautious would be using anything related to a client I was working with. I think you have to be really clear about what you're using it for, and also to inform the client if you are using it for their, and definitely not using it in a free version. So yeah, that ChatGPT all the way at the moment.
And can I just add to that? Yeah, just to add to that, Elaine, it's great, isn't it? And to Anthony as well. Just thinking while we were talking about it, I love the way you develop what you want to do, and then ChatGPT continues. It doesn't just give you what you wanted; it'll suggest the next step, which I love about it, which is very helpful to me.
It's so good for ideation. Like I find there's so much stuff that I wouldn't necessarily think of, or it'd take me a week to, sometimes I find my best ideas are like in the shower, right? Like I can't think of something, and then I'm like, go to bed, wake up the next day, and then you're like, yes, well, I'm having shit. That's what I'm going to do. So it's just, you say, give me a range of possibilities. It's wonderful for just giving you a starting point.
There's a really interesting comment. It's quite a funny comment that Emma's just put in the chat saying, I use ChatGPT to write a supporting comment for a planning application at my daughter's school. It referenced various planning legislations, environmental aspects, etc. And the headmaster personally wrote to me to thank me for such an in-depth comment. I looked so professional. Awkward. I want to comment on the awkward, because I do still think people are still a little hesitant about, do we say we use ChatGPT? Do we just take the compliment and run with it? What do we do? And so there was the post the other week, I think it was you actually, wasn't it, Carolyn, about saying how open are people about using ChatGPT? I think it was yours on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, people don't. Well, I mean, I do. I didn't even bother hiding the amount of Zs, but in that webinar that we had last week, one of the people who was attending gave me a tip, which was brilliant. She just said, "Oh, go and pop it into the GPT behind the scenes," and I've done that, and I haven't seen a Z since. So that's been great. But I do think people feel they should cover it up somehow, but wouldn't it be a bit silly of you if you weren't using it at all now? I mean, the headmaster probably knows very well that you used it, but that you collaborated with it. It was, that's the whole point. You collaborated. And Emma, I think as long as you were checking your sources, just checking it wasn't having a hallucination, because, it is hardwired to be helpful and it'll make stuff up if it doesn't know the answer. So just got to watch that. But I'm guessing you did those things.
Can we talk about that a second? Because a couple of you have mentioned hallucinations in ChatGPT, and I have no idea what you're talking about. So
it's just when it makes stuff up, basically, isn't it?
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it does make stuff up.
The problem with it is because it's coming back in natural language, right? It can sound quite convincing. So it can,
yes, exactly.
In a nice way, it can say utter bollocks, but it's like, oh yeah, that sounds like it's right. So people go, okay. So I think, you got to be careful. But at the end of the day, this is how I would encourage people to think about it. Is all this, they've really done. They've scraped the internet, right, for the world's information. So it's like having access to a massive library, but instead of saying, okay, you need to go to this section, you know what I mean? Or you go in and there's so many books and it's like, oh my God, it's just saying, hey, this paragraph from this book's relevant to what you're talking about. So why wouldn't you use it? It's just an easier way of accessing information. And so I think what's going to happen is if you don't use it and get on board with it in some way, like it's just going to slow you down. So embrace it. It's all good. Just like, like Carolyn was saying, you just check it, right?
Yes. And somebody else. Sorry, go on, Elaine.
I was just going to say, I think it's really important to check, especially if you're using it for HR, because for those working across jurisdictions or internationally, it will tend to throw up UK. If you're based in the UK, it'll tend to throw up UK legislation, same as in the Isle of Man. You have to tell it, give me the Manx legislation, or in France, give me the Règlement de Travail, or whichever jurisdiction you're in. You need to be really careful that you're checking what it's giving you back.
I think if it's anything where you're actually going to be stating supposed facts or research or things like that, but you can ask it to give sources, can't you?
Yes.
Because I know that somebody on the workshop the other week was saying that they questioned the sources and ChatGPT admitted that it made it up because it didn't know the answer, so it made it up, and that made me laugh out loud.
Yeah, you can. There's also like with the I know I've used this word a lot, but the prompt engineering, like as in knowing what to write in there, you can set it up so you say, like, don't make anything up, right? And cite all sources for the information that you're providing and all of that type of thing. So you can sort of, there are ways you can ask it, but I would say if you're dealing with anything that's in the, like the legal realm, you really need to, you should not be relying on GPT.
Or medicine or science.
Right, yeah. Right. If you're a doctor and you're like, okay, this person looks like, we might have to chop their leg off, then you probably wouldn't go to GPT
do it or
and
not?
say, yeah, should I chop their leg off? And it goes and says, yes, of course you should. And don't give them any anesthesia. Then, I'd be thinking twice about that.
Oh my goodness. We've got about 10 minutes left. I would love to know, for those of you listening, do you have any questions? What would you like to know while we've got this panel here? Please type something in there and let's see what you want to know. I'd love to do a prompt engineering workshop at some point, or just, learn a bit more about it, because I feel like I'm winging it a bit. But yeah, I'm sure there's stuff
you should
out
read
there.
my book, Kirsty.
Have you got a link to your book? That sounded like it was planned then. Absolutely.
Here's £5.
Send me the link to your book, because when I send the email out tomorrow with the recording, I'll put the link to the book in there. So.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Nikki has said in the chat that they just had an AI usage amnesty at work to determine who's using what platform and why, and ChatGPT came out on top. It does seem to be the most popular one, doesn't it?
It's good.
Well, it was first, wasn't it?
Fair, yeah. Yeah, I think I've been using it about 2 years now, thereabouts, but certainly accelerated my usage of it.
Yeah, that's quite a long time, I would say. A lot of people haven't been using it that long, and you're probably using it quite regularly because of the amount of, communications that you're doing. So you're probably quite naturally good at prompting without realizing it, because it isn't called natural language processing for nothing.
Good point. Laura would be interested in recommendations on candidate screening AI platforms. Previous experience was not credible, but this was a few years back. Anybody got any good or bad experiences there?
Not personal experience, but I did come across a good resource, which I'll send you, Kirsty, to send out. It was the top 15, I think, of HR systems that are being recommended at the moment. So I'll send you that over.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's such a crowded market. I feel like the candidate screening, the recruitment piece, have that side of HR has jumped on this a lot faster than some other areas. But we'll get that link, Laura, we'll get it sent out.
Also, ChatGPT is perfect, as is Perplexity.ai, for answering that question, Laura. You can never really beat personal recommendations, and getting a list from Elaine or whatever is always really, I would always recommend that as well. If you can get it, reach out to your community. But also just ask ChatGPT, because you can tell it what you're looking for, and you can ask for the most recent, the one that's the most relevant to your circumstances and has got these particular features that you need. And you might say, I'm balancing these criteria. These are my priorities, So you can really have the most amazing sort of reconnaissance, really, of the market very quickly. And of course, it will suggest things to you. Then it starts, as we said earlier, it starts suggesting, would you like me to do this? And would you like me to do that? Go like, yes, please. I mean, the times I say to it, yes, do all those things, please.
Yes. I do too. Anybody else got any questions? I guess the last thing I was going to say, we covered this a little bit early, talking about the future of HR, but I would love to know what your thoughts are on, if we were doing this webinar again in 5 years' time, is it even possible to predict how things might have changed, or is it just moving too fast for us to have a clue what things are going to look like? Carolyn, go for it.
Yes, well, I won't be here. It'll be my avatar for a start, which I'm definitely going to be sending out there as soon as all those horrible hand movements stop looking like Uncanny Valley. As soon as that's over, I'm out there with that. And I've already cloned my voice, as you know, and it's working as a treat. Yeah, for my podcast, which is really cool. So that's going to be my difference. And then, of course, you know, that means that I can send stuff out in emails. I can be very specific with client inquiries. I can use my avatar for all those things, just first line response. And then, you know, you obviously get into your personal relationships with people when you're a bit deeper down the line on the pipeline with your sales or whatever.
I absolutely love that idea of voice cloning. And for those listening, Carolyn told us all about this the other week. It takes some time. You have to do a good few hours of recording of your voice. And you built a little recording studio out of yoga mat pieces, didn't you, or something, and so that it was soundproofed. And so we were all imagining ourselves with like a towel over our head trying to but once it's got it right. You said that the people that know you have listened to it and can't tell the difference, can they?
My mother can't tell the difference. I think that's got to be the best test of all, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And then you can use that. You could like take a subject and get it to create a podcast, and it's going to go out in your voices. There's one to think about as well, Anthony, for your podcast. You could save yourself a lot. Oh, but you sit on the screen and talk to people, don't you?
Yeah. I'm old school in that respect.
But I love it. There's some incredible things that we can do, and I know that there's going to be more that we can cover on this topic, because firstly, it's not going away and it's continuously developing. So thank you to all of you for being part of this discussion today. I will send the recording out tomorrow, and I will add any links that my panel would like to share. So yes, I hope that people have found this useful. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.